Whether your team is your family, your business, or your employees, staying connected is crucial. You can depend on the Cross Insurance family
Very good.
to provide the best insurance solutions for you. We've got your team protected. Visit crossagency.com today.
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to welcome you to tonight's Boston.com book club discussion. We did want to take a minute before we check in. We just want to make sure that everyone out there is doing okay, given the chaos that unfolded yesterday at the US Capitol. So please feel free to drop a brief word about how you're feeling using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen if you'd like. I know this has all been a lot to process, especially in the middle of a global pandemic and with all of the other emotions going on coming out of 2020 and watching the results in Georgia. And it can be definitely really overwhelming. And I think we're all feeling that. So we hope you're doing what you need to keep you from being overwhelmed and to take care of yourselves during this time. And thank you so much for choosing to spend this evening with us. Hopefully we can even provide a little sense of escape during our discussion with Karen M. McManus about her latest YA mystery novel, The Cousins, which is so great. And I'm so excited to get to talk with Karen about this. So let's get started. I'm very honored and again, very excited to be here. My name is Kate Michael. I am a bookseller and assistant manager at Porter Square Books in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we are employee owned. So actually I am a part owner as well. We're located right in Porter Square in central Cambridge, Somerville area. And yeah, we're also online at Boston.com, and we do, shipping nationwide and lots of other things to get books out there, which again, like during the pandemic, having to pivot to sort of a more online presence has been in some ways really difficult, and in other ways really great because we get to connect with a lot more of you. Yeah, and huge thank you, first of all, to Boston.com. I'm so honored to be participating in this book club series. Thanks as well to, I wanted to thank Paul Swiden of Silver Unicorn Books for reaching out to me and helping get this put together. It's just really wonderful to have a series like this that is introducing people to books about New England and New England authors and New England independent booksellers. And the New England bookstore community is a really wonderful, generous community. And a great one to be a part of. So I'm really grateful for all of the amazing indie booksellers that I've gotten to know. And tonight I'm really thrilled to get to welcome Karen McManus. She's a New York Times bestselling author, #1 New York Times, USA Today, and international bestselling author. She has 4 books currently out, and her work has been translated into more than 40 languages worldwide. She lives in Massachusetts. And also is a huge staff favorite at Porter Square Books. I think 2 of her books, One of Us is Lying and Two Can Keep a Secret, were both staff picks at the store, and everyone on staff is a huge fan. And I've attended some of her other virtual events that she's done with Porter Square Books, and her fans are just so wonderful, like the most loyal fans of anyone out there. And I think that definitely says something about her as a writer.
They are the greatest.
Yeah. It's like really fun to watch your fans interact with you.
Yeah. Well,
and
thank you for that intro.
Coursework. So we're gonna have a conversation about The Cousins, which is your newest book.
Yes.
And we are also going to answer audience questions during this. So you can ask those using the Q&A function, which will be at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to leave comments, let us know where you're joining us from. It's really fun that we can have people from all over join us on virtual events like this, and leave any comments or questions in that Q&A function. And other things to know are that you probably noted that your video and microphone are off. So that's just going to be, you'll be muted and have no video for the duration of the event. And this event also is going to be recorded and distributed. So if you do want to say something to us, we would love it if you could drop some questions and comments in that Q&A function. And yeah, Karen, I'm so excited to be here.
I am too. And thanks so much for the introduction. And thanks everybody for joining us. I mean, as Kate said, it's been a really rough couple days. I know I had a hard time tearing myself away from the news. I felt like I needed to be present and react and respond, but I was also really happy to have something else to do tonight. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you and answering any questions that the readers and the people online might have. So thank you all for coming. And Kate, thank you for doing this with me.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like we already have some questions down there, which I'm excited for us to get to. We will get to as many as we can. I'm gonna be selfish and start the conversation off with you with some of my own questions first. But it does look like we have some people joining us both from Wisconsin and from France, which is amazing.
That's awesome.
Greetings to all of you, and thanks for joining us. The first thing that really struck me about this book is the sense of setting that it has. And I'm not originally from Massachusetts, but I've lived in Boston for a few years now. And the setting just really gives me that vibe of the old New England resort towns, you know? And I wondered if there are any, I know Gold Cove Island is fictional, but are there any real places that you have personal experience in or connections to that you base that off of?
Oh yeah, it's definitely meant to be kind of a sister island to Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, which I grew up visiting, and I've always loved them, just as a destination. But I think islands are also wonderful as a setting for a mystery because they're so contained. My favorite mystery of all time is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. And in that, people get taken to an island and they can't leave. They actually cannot leave. There is no transport. There's a storm, so they're truly trapped. The cousins could leave, but it's not simple for them to do that. Once they're there for quite some time. And it's something of a fishbowl to them because their family is very well known on the island, but they themselves have never been there. So everyone is looking at them, is curious about them, and they have no real frame of reference for that.
Yeah, absolutely. The insular community thing, I think, is really big and plays a part in some of your other books. I know Two Can Keep Secret is also a very sort of small community, insular community. And sort of, I think the way that family secrets can affect that entire community when it's so small like that is something I thought a lot about while I read this book, for sure.
I actually did a research trip to Nantucket in 2018, just before I started writing, because I wanted to remember what it was like to approach the island, because the cousins are seeing it for the first time, and just get some more setting details. And I was chatting with a bookseller there and telling her that I was working on this book. And she said, well, why don't you just set it in Nantucket? I said, oh, I don't feel like I can, because Nantucket has such a distinct personality. It wouldn't make sense for a family like the Story family, this fictional family, to have so much prominence on a real island like Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard. That just doesn't make sense with their history. So I felt like I had to create a similar island, but it's definitely meant to be in the same vein.
Yeah. Did you find any in your research, any real historical people that had this kind of influence on those communities?
Well, I did research into families that came over in the Mayflower, because that was, in my mind, that was how this, family started. They could trace their roots back to the Mayflower. And Story was the name of a passenger on on the Mayflower, his name was Elijah Story. But the way that he was recorded and the fact that he was alone, it was thought that he was likely a servant, not one of the prominent families. And I thought that's actually very likely for this type of family, because the people who built the fortune were quite entrepreneurial. They really built something out of nothing. And so that seemed to be an interesting starting point for this type of family. But I did sort of look into, how did people make fortunes in whaling? How did they lose fortunes? Because this family really had a lot of ups and downs before they reached their current level of prominence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know also you said in another interview that you sort of based the idea of the family, the Story family, on the Kennedys, as far as like exploring legacy and family legacy and the way that affects people generationally. What drew you to the idea specifically of like legacy and what it means to be a part of a prominent family like that?
Yeah, I got the idea when I was reading an article about the Kennedy grandchildren. And of course, being someone born in Massachusetts, I am very familiar with the Kennedys. And but I wasn't as familiar with the younger generation. And I was reading through some really interesting things that they're doing in politics and entertainment in various fields. And I thought I wonder what it would be like to have the type of name that opens so many doors. That was my first thought. And then my second thought was, I wonder what it would be like if all those doors suddenly started shutting. And then I thought, and what would happen then if you had the opportunity to get that back? And so that's where the Story family came from. They're not meant to mirror the Kennedys really in any other way, but it was that notion of having a very recognizable name within their community, having a path set ahead for their family that they were expected to follow. And then suddenly all of that changes. The grandmother disinherits all her 4 children with very little explanation, and they have a very different future than they would have otherwise. And their children don't understand any of the privilege that they grew up with. So it's a legacy interrupted. And that was the notion that was interesting to me.
Right. Yeah, and you really do a great job of weaving in other perspectives too. I think of the people who are, like many people who are affected by this family and watching them, but don't grow up with that same privilege.
Right.
Which makes a really, really interesting contrast.
And that's what's fun about writing from the cousins' perspective, is they are outsiders,
Yeah.
but there is this parallel existence that they could have led if things had been different, and they're conscious of that to varying degrees.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the other big theme that I was thinking about while I read this book that I really enjoyed was sort of the fear that the people who are supposed to be the closest to you in a family like that can be really different from your idea of them and be sort of unknown to you.
Yeah.
Which, yeah. And I think maybe also the idea of like pretending to be someone you're not and how difficult that is. Even in characters like, I don't think this is a spoiler because this is the first scene, but Millie opening the book with a scene where she's essentially pretending to be someone else.
Yeah.
And really how I think all of the characters kind of come into their own and learn how to become more genuinely themselves over the course of the book.
There's a lot about identity in the
Yeah.
book, and some of it is pretty literal, in terms of, are you really who you say you are? But some of it is more subtle, to your point, it's these characters kind of coming to the realization of accepting their family history, understanding their parents better, understanding the type of person that they are and that they would like to be, and how do they get there. So my hope whenever I create these characters is that they go on this journey that complements the external arc of the mystery, and they each have their own stakes that are related to that, their personal stakes, things that they need to figure out for themselves in order to kind of become the version of themselves that they'd like to be.
Yeah. Do you find YA a good place to do that? Just, I like that time of your life is so much when you're discovering your own identity. It seems to play really well into the themes of the novel.
Yeah, I think that's why I love young adult literature so much is because it is that time when you are figuring out your place in the world and who you are, and you're questioning everything. And that's such an interesting headspace. And when you couple that with a plot that's also high stakes, I think that there can be just a really high emotional resonance to what the characters are going through.
Yeah. I think so. We have some like lots of questions coming in.
Let's
So
get
I
to them.
might start tying some in. Eileen just asked, how is writing a YA book different than writing an adult novel? And is there a different formula or approach?
Well, I should say, I can only probably half answer this because I have not written an adult novel. But in terms of, sort of how the industry thinks of it, it's not necessarily just the age of the protagonist, because there certainly are adult novels that have teenage protagonists. It's kind of more about what happens in the journey to the character. And typically when you're a young adult book, there really is some of that coming of age, so it's about that character's journey. It's about them figuring out their place in the world. And that's what appeals to me. I have occasionally thought about writing an adult thriller. I think that would be an interesting challenge, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, a lot of people too are asking in a semi-related vein about how you set out the novels, all of your novels, but specifically like this one, I think they all have a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah.
So how you map out the plot and keep track of all the threads. And this one goes back and forth between multiple time periods, and like all of it ties together so ingeniously. How do you keep track of that and map things out? And do you plot the twists in advance?
I try to. I always know how it ends. The only exception was my book, Two Can Keep a Secret, which I ended up writing 3 times. So that was a terrible experience. I do not recommend writing a book that way. And ever since that was my second book, I've been a lot more disciplined about plotting. But I usually start with a big sort of hooky idea. Like my debut novel, One of Us is Lying, it was The Breakfast Club with murder. And I didn't really know what that meant when the idea popped into my head. With Cousins, it was family legacy interrupted, but I didn't know what that meant. And the second step for me is usually thinking about characters. What kind of people would I like to put into a situation, and what kind of fears do they have? What kind of goals do they have? What do they want? What do they need? And that usually helps me start thinking about what the ultimate mystery might be. And then I go into the nitty-gritty of the plot. And I like to use something called a beat sheet, which is a screenwriting tool. And you can just download it from the internet. It's an Excel spreadsheet. But it kind of gives you a sense of what are the big beats of a story. Of course, you have your opening, you have your inciting incident, you have your rising action, your midpoint. These are things that you can kind of map out and say, okay, I have to have moments here. And at least if I know those big moments, then I can usually start writing. And then it gets a lot more detailed as I go. It's kind of the headlights approach of writing, that you can see far enough to keep going on the road, but you don't see everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I do outline, I do plot. I try to be detailed, but it absolutely changes as I write. It changes a lot.
Definitely. In addition to using the a sort of structure that is loosely based on a screenplay structure, I think like this book is so visual as far as description goes, and like the setting is really rich, and you have all of these really lush details for everything from architecture to like these beautiful costumes, the ball gowns that the girls get to wear and that they wear at the summer gala. There's been such a surge of YA books being adapted for like visual media. Is there any chance that we will see the Cousins adapted for film or TV?
There is nothing I can talk about right now. There's always a chance.
Oh, exciting. I know that One of Us is Lying is also sort of going through that at the moment.
Yeah, that is actually, it's had a series order from NBC Universal to ultimately stream on its new Peacock streaming service. So that, I think everything is kind of subject to change, obviously, in the world that we live in now. But the goal is to shoot that this spring, maybe into the summer. And possibly, if everything goes well, it could air at the end of this year. So that's exciting.
Oh, that's
Two
awesome.
Can Keep a Secret is also in development, but that's much earlier. And that's just in the script phase right now. So it's, yeah, it's really an interesting side of the business that I had no experience in before it happened. And so far I've got the two books in different stages, and they've been very different types of processes, but, equally positive and interesting.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And I'm sure like you probably are semi-involved in the process, but there's a lot of it that I'm sure is out of your hands. But it must be so exciting to sort of watch these things come to life.
Yeah, I'm a consultant, so I get to look at scripts and
Oh,
I
that's
got to see audition tapes, which was a lot of fun. But ultimately, it's someone else's creative vision to translate the book to the screen. So, and I think that's probably how it should be. Sometimes, as I know for me, I'm so close to my work, I'm not sure I could figure out what it takes to make it into a television show. But I really appreciate being part of the process.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's so great. I was a theater major in college, and we did talk about, interpretive works and how they should be different. And so sometimes it is hard when you have like the writer in the room.
Mhm.
You
Yeah, well,
know,
TV
there's
writing is
things that
so
have to
collaborative,
yeah.
and novel writing is so solitary. So it's
Right.
very different.
Have you found this the pandemic times? Have you found the sort of isolation that we're all kind of forced into? Has that been really productive for you as a writer or inhibitive?
No, it's been awful. I feel like everybody else, I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
But it's, I think being a writer is pretty isolating in normal times, but you break that up by traveling and going to events and seeing people in person and renewing, your energy that way. And to not be able to do that is, it's hard. I count myself lucky. I'm healthy. My family's healthy. I do have a job that is remote, so I don't want to complain, but I miss the book world. And it's been hard to write this year. I really had to be disciplined about it, force myself to sit down. It didn't always flow as easily as it did in previous years, but I did manage to revise my fifth book and also draft my sixth one. So I got stuff done, but it was hard. And I've heard from a lot of creatives that they've had a similar experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, it's just, it's something that takes energy and is work. And I think all of that is hard
Yeah.
during during times when it doesn't feel like we're like receiving energy from anyone else. It's like, yeah, just difficult. Speaking of like traveling to places, there's this question from Kate on here. Do you tend to visit towns and places that are similar to what you're writing about in order to do research, aside from Nantucket, which you said you did visit?
Yeah, that was really the only time I had done that. When I wrote Bayview, when I wrote One of Us is Lying, the fictional town of Bayview, that was meant to be outside San Diego. And I have been to San Diego many times, so I felt like I had some understanding. But at the time, I was working full time. I'm a single mom. I couldn't just like go, to San Diego and make sure I was getting little details right. So I did not do any travel for that. For Echo Ridge in Vermont, that again was just based on kind of like my childhood. Like we used to go to little towns in Vermont and look at the foliage and taste maple syrup. And so I was drawing on memories for that. I was joking actually on social media because, my first book was set in California. My second book was set in Vermont. My third book was also California because it was a sequel, but my fourth book was set in an island off the coast of Massachusetts. My fifth book is essentially set in Boston. So I was joking that for book 6, I'm just going to invite people into my living room because I just keep getting closer and closer to home.
Oh, that's so great. It's so fun to get to read again. Like I'm not from here originally, but so fun to read about, places that seem familiar now. And I love reading books set in Boston at this point and being like, oh, I know that street or that restaurant or
Yeah, with my fifth book, it was really interesting because it's set in it takes place over 24 hours. So it's a really compressed time frame. And people had to get from point A to point B in a realistic time. And so I would actually do that. I would go to Government Center and I would catch a train and I would take it to Leechmere and I would time myself. I was like, okay, I could do it in X amount of time. And I think I would call the timeline realistic with no traffic.
right. Yeah, that must again like I think for things like mysteries and thrillers, it seems like putting constraints on your characters, right? Really kind of ups the stakes. So it did the compressing the time kind of feel similar to say like putting your characters on an island.
Yeah, exactly. You've got a countdown, something has to happen by X time and everything is geared around that.
Oh, that's so cool. And that one comes out this fall, right?
This fall, yeah, I don't have a publication date yet, but I'm guessing it'd be similar to the Cousins, so maybe November timeframe.
Ooh, so exciting. Um, let's look at some of these questions. We had some pre-submitted ones, so I want to make sure that we get to those. One of them is, how much work do you usually do in a day? Do you have a regular amount that you do each day, or do you play it by ear? And I think just generally, like if you want to tell us a little bit about your schedule and the writing life and
Yeah.
maybe what that is normally like and what it's been like in this past year.
When I started writing, I was still working full time. So I would write usually from 9 to midnight. And then I would write sometimes on the weekends. And now I am a full-time author, which is wonderful. And so I have more time to spread out my writing. And yet, I don't know if it's just habit or if I'm just a night owl, but I still find that I do my best writing between 9 and midnight. So I try to spend my day often doing marketing or doing administrative stuff or maybe planning, outlining, that type of thing. And then when the rest of the day is done, I'll write. The amount really depends on whether or not I'm on deadline and whether whether the story is flowing. When stories are flowing, I can write for 5 or 6 hours on end and I don't even notice it. And when it's not, I can maybe spend an hour and then I'm exhausted mentally and I have to take a break.
Yeah, it definitely can really be like work that just totally exhausts you.
It's very draining, building worlds and people, and especially when you're not quite there, you haven't quite hit your stride. So once I hit my stride, it gets easier.
Mm-hmm. It's so nice to hear too that there are other people who have like the most creative energy late at night, because I always feel like our society kind of pushes you to work during the day, and I feel definitely like creative work especially is so much easier for me to do it like 9 to midnight.
Yeah, it's the perfect time for me. And I would be so tired when I used to work the next day because I would have to get up at 6, but I would still manage to get it done.
Great. So there's a question from Sheila that is, what have you learned about the craft of thriller writing? I assume during the writing of this book, The Cousins, that you didn't know before. Is there anything that like struck you during this writing process that was new or interesting?
Well, with this process in particular, there were dual timelines, and there was, kind of generational issues between the parent version of the story family and their grandchildren who are our protagonists. And when I started the story, I thought that I would only write from the point of view of the 3 cousins. But once I did one cycle of points of view, something felt like it was missing. And I thought, if I'm going to ask people to care about these characters, because for me, thrillers always come down to the characters. Like if you don't care about the people, the best plot in the world can fall flat if you don't care about the people who are involved. So I need you to be invested in this family. And I was worried that you couldn't get there if you didn't have a better understanding of the earlier generation. So that was when I made the decision to bring in one of the parents and give them a point of view. And initially I thought, I'll do all 4 of the siblings and I'll have 7 points of view and this will be great. Well, that was a terrible idea that very quickly went by the wayside. It's just too much. But I think what that helped me realize was the importance of getting the right characters in front of the readers, but also the importance of having enough sub mysteries to come alongside your big mystery, because everyone knows the big mystery, why were the kids disinherited? But you can't answer that right away. So you have to have other questions that get answered, I think, in the interim as you're building toward that, because that's satisfying for people. I know that's satisfying for me. I'm always flipping pages because I want to know stuff. And I like it when I'm rewarded. And even if it's a relatively small piece of the puzzle, I've got it in place, and that gives me, momentum to keep going and figure out the rest of it or not.
Yeah, I think definitely this one with the dual timelines and, piecing everything together. It was so much fun to read, and really just like I turned pages so fast in this because I did like want to know what came next and want to figure out every single part of the mystery. And I had a couple of theories that ended up being partially right or partially wrong or totally wrong.
I think that's the best, I'm never offended when people tell me they guessed pieces of it. I was like, you should guess. I put some really careful clues in place so that you could potentially guess it. So that's okay.
Absolutely. There are clues that, of course, like once you understand what's going on, you can go back and be like, wow, this was absolutely set up from the beginning. And there are clues,
and there's red herrings too, and you don't know which is which, ideally.
Yeah. Speaking of the multiple viewpoints, there's a question in here that I may alter a little bit, but someone asked, who's your favorite character from any of your books? And I would ask too, like, who is your favorite character? What was your favorite viewpoint to write from in this book?
Well, it's interesting. I just finished my 6th book, and I was writing down all of my point of view characters that I've ever written. And over 6 books, there are 17 of them. So 17 points of view that I have written over the past 4 years. And that is a lot of people. So it's hard for me to say favorite because I love them all, but I have a real appreciation for characters with strong voices because they make my job easier. When I have all these people to juggle, if there's one of them that almost writes themselves, I am so grateful for that. And in One of Us is Lying, for example, that character was Nate. In The Cousins, that character was Millie. Her voice just came really naturally. The other 2, I had to ease them out a little bit more, and they required more rewrites initially until I felt like I was fully in their head. And with Millie, I always felt like I would know what she was going to say or what she was going to do in any given situation.
Yeah, her voice was so strong. It was such a joy to read, just really fun. I think I related the most to Aubrey, including having been a swimmer in high school. So all of her internal insecurities, I was like, yeah, I think about my broad shoulders all the time. Butterfly was my stroke. So she kind of touched me in that way. But I think Millie was the most fun to read for sure. She just had such a strong personality. Speaking of which, we have a question from Ling Mei that says, how was writing Millie as a biracial character of Japanese and American descent? I enjoyed how sensitively race was handled and how Millie sees her Asianness affecting how others treat her.
I appreciate that. Whenever I write outside my lane, I work with authenticity readers. So someone who shares the background of that character so that they can read their sections or the whole book if they want to, and just help me make sure that I'm getting it right as I can, that I'm not engaging in stereotypes, that I'm not missing anything. So that's a really helpful part of the process, and it's very common in the young adult space to do that.
Yeah, I think it's been really cool to see sort of why kind of leading the charge on things like that. And it's been really, really interesting to see why social media, especially and reviewers and bloggers over the past few years, really championing that.
Yeah, there are really good conversations about representation happening in the young adult space. And for me, as a multi-point of view writer, um, I have this balance where I don't want to talk over other authors who are writing from their own experience, but I also want to create a cast that reflects the diverse world that we live in. So I try to strike that balance, and be respectful. And with each book, you take that on and just do your best with that.
Hmm. Um, so we have a question from Kenzie that says, if you were not active in the literary world, what would you see yourself doing? And I know you were a journalism major and kind of use that in writing your books. Is that what you would be doing, or is your dream job something totally different?
Now, my dream job is this because
That's
I was doing something different before this. I was working in marketing
mm,
and I had been doing that for a while, and I had a team of people. There was actually a great team. I missed them. And I enjoyed my job, but I would say it was not my dream job. And when this opportunity came around, initially, I never expected to leave my day job because for most authors, that's really hard to do. I was very fortunate with my first book, and it took off in a way that allowed me to do that. So I definitely feel like I'm leading my dream life in terms of a job now. I did get a degree in journalism. I never actually used it professionally. So I just use it now to draft fake news stories for my books. And almost every book of mine does include some aspect of that, some aspect of reporting or some type of show that, like in One of Us is Lying, there was a true crime show that was following this, everything that was happening in the town of Bayview. In Echo Ridge, there were also reporters who were kind of descending on the town as things started heating up. So I'm very interested in that, the way the media lens gets played on situations and people, and what it's like to have that glare on you, and then also what it's like when it goes away. So I always seem to find myself going back to that in my books.
yeah. Well, you can definitely see like both the idea of being in the spotlight, in the media spotlight, and how that affects the way people act. And then also, of course, like it's a thriller and there are crimes happening, and that all
Right.
feels very, realistic in the sense of like the way things are reported and covered up and revealed. And I liked having the local paper on the island, was a great touch that really added to the stakes of the entire book in the end.
Yeah, and of course, them being part of a prominent family, everything they do is news, and that's not something they're used to in their normal lives.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Um, let's see. It looks like there are a few questions that are about your favorite book, or your favorite book of 2020, or
Mm.
your favorite book as a kid that inspired you to become a writer.
Oh,
Um,
well, I'll
if you
start
have
with the
any good books that, I know like favorite is really hard, but any good books that you've read recently or that you
I
enjoyed
read
growing
some
up?
great books in 2020. I feel like 2020 was an amazing year for thrillers. So I read a lot of YA thrillers, and my favorites were Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson, and The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, which actually has some really interesting parallels to The Cousins. It's about a billionaire who leaves his fortune to a girl who doesn't know him. So it's again this idea of inheritance and fish out of water. It's a really fun read. And on the adult side, I really love The Guest List by Lucy Foley, who's a new author to me. But this is the second book I read from her and enjoyed a lot. And also Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. So those were probably my favorites.
Yeah, that
Um,
was a great one. I loved
so
that book.
good.
Um, Mary asks, the Boston area is rich with writers. Do you have like collaboration with other local writers, or relationships with anyone around town?
Yeah, in fact, there is a really robust young adults community in the Boston area. And back when, before times when we used to leave our houses, we would have regular meetups, or try to. get together, just chat. We'd also go to each other's events a lot because there used to be lots of events at Portersboro Books, for example, where you would go and support your fellow authors. I don't have local critique partners. Most of mine are online. That's just where I met them. But yeah, we do have a community here, and it's one of the aspects I'm really looking forward to getting back to.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I miss having those events and getting to see everyone. And it is really fun. Like I feel like there is such a, especially the YA, I think at the Porter events, like you'll have a YA event for someone and like everyone in the community will show up, and it's really, really great to see that relationship between everyone.
And in the YA space too, you tend to have debut groups, the year that your first book comes out, there's a Facebook group and you get to know each other. And so there were I was out in 2017 with my first book. There were a lot of Boston writers that same year, and we still get together, or we did, when we could do that type of thing. And just catch up. So that's been really nice too. Again, this can be a solitary business. So to have writer friends is really important.
Yeah. And then we have a couple of questions to just ask, like, where do you get most of your ideas? Do you have like favorite places to write in your house, in your space, or out of your house? And yeah, where do most of your ideas pop up when you get them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I tend to get inspired by other media, so I got the idea for One of Us is Lying when I was listening to the radio and the theme from The Breakfast Club came on. That was the start of that. And then with Two Can Keep a Secret, I was watching Forensic Files, and there was a case. It was a case that had never been solved, and they were interviewing someone's grandmother, and I started thinking, this was so long ago, what would it be like to be one of the teenagers in this family? And that's where that the character of Ellery came from. The Cousins, I got the idea when I was reading a magazine. So I like to absorb a lot of stories around me, and there's often one little kernel in there that I can't stop thinking about.
That's yeah. And do you mostly draw inspiration for characters from like media, or do you draw from people in your life, or of course a combination of both?
Yeah, not so much people in my life because that could be dangerous. I mean, little bits and pieces, but mostly what I think about, because I write multi-point of view, is when I first get the idea, I do start thinking about what combination of people would be interesting around here, because they have to contrast with each other in a satisfying way. And they have to be able to connect with each other. And they also need to be in conflict with one another, so you really have to think of them as a unit and not just 3 or 4 separate characters. And if you do it right, I feel like the chemistry between them is almost another character. It's like something tangible. It's something that the reader, can really kind of latch onto as they're following this journey and can start rooting for these people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really feel that with both the cousins and the other characters around them in this book.
Yeah, and the Cousins, they were fun to write because they didn't know each other very well at all in the beginning. Their family's very estranged. They only have really brief childhood memories of each other, and they don't necessarily trust or like each other initially. So it's really a process for them to get to the point where they're a team and they're working together.
Yeah. Well, I think we're about out of time, but really quickly, is there anything that you can tell us about your next book coming out in the fall, or the 6th one that you just finished?
Yeah, the one coming out in the fall is called You'll Be the Death of Me. And I like to call that Ferris Bueller's Day Off with Murder. So again, this was like a movie inspiration. And I actually got the idea when I was doing a panel with a bunch of other YA authors, and they were saying, oh, Karen, you should just keep writing movies that are like, 80s movies, writing books that are 80s movies plus murder. And we were joking about that. And then I thought, oh, wait, Ferris Bueller's, that could work. So the idea is these 3 estranged friends skip school, get caught up in a crime, and have to kind of come clean with themselves and one another before they can resolve what they've gotten caught up in.
Oh, that's so great.
And it takes place in Boston, so.
Yes.
Boston and
So
Cambridge.
looking forward to that, like 80s movie murder mystery thriller set in Boston, 24-hour time period.
Got a little bit of a rom-com aspect too, so
Yes.
interesting move.
Yeah, that will be so great. So looking forward to it. And it's just been such a joy to get to talk with you tonight.
You too. And I appreciate everybody hanging in here with us and taking some time.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here with us and for your thoughts and questions and comments. And there were so many good questions and comments in the Q&A. And again, thank you to Boston.com for hosting this.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone.